In Laboratory Reddit, today's story is
I survived cancer, lost my mother, and discovered that my stepmother had been planning to destroy her memory for months. To fully understand my current situation, I need to share with you an event that transformed my life 5 years ago. Back then, I was a typical 17-year-old student, like any other teenager who worried about her grades, her friendships, and the excitement of prom. However, everything took an unexpected turn when I found myself in a hospital room, facing a diagnosis that no one expects to receive: advanced lymphoma. Although I had always known that cancer was a life-changing disease, I could never have imagined the true impact it would have until it became my own personal battle. Treatment began immediately. Every morning, as I looked at myself in the mirror, I watched my hair gradually weaken until it finally disappeared. This loss went far beyond a simple aesthetic concern. It represented everything that the disease was taking away from me. During this difficult period, my mother became my mainstay, my unwavering support in the midst of so much uncertainty. When I started to lose my hair, she decided to shave her head in solidarity, assuring me that our beauty did not depend on our hair and that together we would overcome this ordeal. However, fate had other plans. My mother died suddenly during my last round of chemotherapy. Her passing affected me in a way that not even the cancer had managed. The person who had been by my side at every moment, who had promised me that one day we would both have our long, beautiful hair again, was not there to celebrate the end of my treatment. I achieved remission, but she was no longer there to share that moment of victory. After she left, I made a vow both to her memory and to myself: I would let my hair grow until it was as long and beautiful as we had always dreamed. It would be a living testimony to our shared struggle, even though she was no longer physically there to see it. The years have passed, and now my hair reaches my lower back, strong and healthy, constantly reminding me of everything I have been through. For me, it is not just hair, it represents my strength, my loss, and my survival. It is something I value deeply because I understand everything it symbolizes. My mother's death had a tremendous impact on my father. Despite his efforts to remain strong for my sake, it was clear that something fundamental had broken inside him. He took refuge in his work, devoting himself entirely to looking after my health and helping me rebuild my life after cancer. For years, it seemed as if he had lost his vital spark, simply existing from day to day. However, 2 years ago, fate led him to meet Sarah through a mutual friend. Initially, I was happy for him. Sarah seemed like a nice person and, most importantly, she had managed to bring a smile back to my father's face. Seeing him regain his joy after so much time in pain was comforting, as if he had finally found a new reason to be happy. For quite some time, I sincerely believed that Sarah was beneficial to him. She wasn't trying to force her way into our family, and she seemed to respect our history of pain and healing. However, as time went by, things began to take a different turn. About 6 months ago, my father proposed to Sarah, and she accepted. Preparations for the wedding began, and at first I felt genuinely excited. My father deserved this new opportunity to be happy after everything he had been through, and I was willing to support him in any way I could. However, it was then that Sarah began to show a different side to her personality, in a subtle but undeniable way. Sarah has a daughter named Emma, 19, who has always kept a certain distance from me. I didn't give it much thought at first, attributing it to the natural period of adjustment involved in the merging of two families, especially considering our age difference. I never had any problems with her, and I was hopeful that we would eventually find common ground. However, Emma continued to keep her distance, and I respected her decision, assuming it was part of the adjustment process. The situation came to a head about a week ago, when Sarah invited me to her house for what she called a wedding planning discussion. I assumed we would be discussing dresses, floral arrangements, or other similar details, so I didn't think too much of it. However, I should have been suspicious when she insisted that my father not be present. When I arrived, I found Sarah and Emma sitting at the kitchen table with a folder full of wedding plans in front of them. I sat down, ready to listen to their ideas, and that was when Sarah made a request that left me speechless. She told me, with disconcerting calm, that I needed to cut my hair significantly to maintain the aesthetic of the wedding. It was not a request, but an order. According to her, my long hair would upstage both her and Emma on their special day. Her plan was for all the bridesmaids, including Emma and me, to have identical hairstyles, and apparently the length of my hair would ruin the uniformity she was looking for. I was completely stunned. It was unbelievable that she was asking me to sacrifice something that had taken me 5 years to cultivate and that had such deep meaning. I immediately refused and tried to explain to her the personal significance of my hair, the promise I had made to my mother and everything it symbolized, but Sarah dismissed my explanations out of hand. She accused me of being stuck in the past and told me that I needed to adapt to my new family. The most painful part was when she had the audacity to suggest that my mother would have wanted me to do it for my father's happiness. At that moment, I lost my composure. How dare she use my mother's memory as a tool of manipulation? How could she try to distort my mother's memory to satisfy something so superficial? I stood up and made my position clear. I would not have my hair cut. I refused to alter something so significant just to fit in with her superficial vision of a perfect wedding. I left her house in tears, consumed by anger and pain. Not even an hour had passed when my phone started ringing nonstop. Sarah had called my father in tears, accusing me of being difficult and disrespectful. She went so far as to threaten to call off the wedding altogether, arguing that she couldn't join a family where her wishes were not respected. My father called me practically begging me to reconsider my position. He told me that Sarah was just stressed out about the wedding arrangements and that I should be more understanding. He insisted that this was his special day and that I was making everything about myself. Now I find myself questioning my actions. Am I being unreasonable? Am I allowing my pride to get in the way of my father's happiness? He has been through so much suffering and has finally found new joy. Who am I to stand in the way of that? However, Sarah's request goes beyond the hair. She is asking me to sacrifice a deeply personal part of my identity just for appearance's sake. My aunts and uncles have also started to get involved in the situation. They constantly call and text me, accusing me of selfishness and reminding me that, after all my father has suffered, I should be willing to make this small sacrifice for his happiness. For them it is just hair, but for me it represents much more. It is my history, my pain, and the living memory of my mother. The only person who seems to truly understand my position is my best friend. She was by my side throughout my cancer treatment and fully understands the significance of my hair. She has told me that Sarah is revealing her true nature, using the wedding as a pretext to exert control over me and bend me to her will. She also pointed out that my father is too blinded by love to see what is really happening. It pains me to admit it, but she's probably right. However, watching my father's happiness fade away is unbearable. After so long, he finally found someone who makes him smile again, and now I'm being portrayed as the villain of the story. What do you think? Am I wrong? Should I give in and cut my hair to please my future stepmother? Update 1. The last few days have been like an emotional roller coaster. It's been chaotic, with opinions coming in from both my family and people I don't even know. My post went viral and I received thousands of messages of support. People from all over shared their experiences of standing up to controlling family members and standing firm in the face of unreasonable demands. Reading these messages gave me the strength I needed and made me feel that I was not alone in this situation. However, while I was receiving support from strangers, the situation at home worsened considerably. The atmosphere with my father and Sarah became increasingly tense. Sarah decided to take a roundabout route. She created a family chat group from which she deliberately excluded me. In this group, she presented herself as an innocent future stepmother who just wanted the wedding to look elegant and coordinated. She told everyone that I refused to accept her new family and Emma, that I was the one creating problems for no reason. Her version of events was outrageous, but the worst part was that she seemed to be convincing everyone. The chat group quickly became a space where everyone supported Sarah and her reasonable request. My family sided with her, saying that I should be more understanding and that, after all, it was only hair. Although I wasn't part of the chat, I found out about everything because a cousin sent me screenshots. I could feel my family's judgment weighing on me like a dark cloud. In the midst of all this, my father showed up at my apartment yesterday. He looked exhausted, like he hadn't slept in days. He didn't say much at first, just sat down and took out an envelope full of old photos of my mother and me. There were photos from when I was a baby, and some from the days of the chemotherapy. It was obvious what he was trying to do. He was hoping that my memories of my mother would soften me up and make me feel guilty so that I would agree to cut my hair for the sake of family peace. He told me that my mother would have wanted me to make sacrifices for the sake of the family unit, that I should be willing to put my feelings aside to help everyone move forward. For a moment, I felt that familiar pang of guilt, the overwhelming weight of trying to balance respect for my mother's memory with my father's happiness. But then something inside me changed. I went to my room and looked for my diary from the days of the cancer. I sat down with my father and opened it to a specific page, the one where I had written about Mom's promise regarding our hair, the nights we spent talking about the future, her last days, and the promise I made to her when she knew I wouldn't be around to see her recover. I read every word out loud. Then I showed her something else, screenshots of conversations between Sarah and Emma. They weren't just any old messages. They had been sent to me by Sarah's niece, who is a friend of Emma's and had discovered what was really going on behind the scenes. In these messages, Sarah and Emma discussed how this whole situation was their chance to put me in my place. They were fed up with me being the center of attention, and Emma had always felt less because of my hair. Emma had struggled with her thin hair for years, and Sarah saw this as the perfect opportunity to level the playing field. It wasn't about the aesthetics of the wedding. It was about power and control. They were trying to erase the parts of my life that didn't fit into the picture-perfect family that Sarah wanted to create. When my father read these messages, he turned pale. He didn't say much, but I could see his mind processing everything. He was starting to realize that this wasn't just stress about the wedding. It was something much deeper. He left my apartment in a daze, taking the diary and the printed screenshots with him. I didn't know what I would do next, but for the first time, I felt that maybe I was seeing the situation for what it really was. The next morning, my father called me. His voice sounded exhausted. He told me that he had confronted Sarah about the messages, hoping that she would have some explanation or deny them. But instead, Sarah exploded. She didn't even try to deny it. She launched into a speech about how Emma deserved to feel special on her big day and how I was a constant reminder of my father's past that needed to be left behind. She admitted that the length of my hair was not just a matter of aesthetics, but that it was about how I diverted attention from them, how the wedding photos would forever be a reminder of the previous life she was trying to replace. Hearing all this was devastating. Sarah didn't just want to control the wedding, she was actively trying to erase any trace of the life my father had before her, including me. My father, however, was still divided. He told me he didn't want to lose Sarah, but he also couldn't ignore how she had manipulated the whole situation. He wanted us all to get along, to somehow make peace. But I knew that was no longer possible. There was no way to reach an agreement in this situation. Every time I spoke to my father, the conversation felt heavier. He tried to be a mediator, desperately clinging to the idea that we could be a happy family. But it was clear that Sarah wasn't interested in that. She saw me as a threat, a constant reminder of everything that existed before her, and she wanted me to disappear. My father sounded increasingly defeated in each conversation, asking me if he couldn't just cut my hair for the wedding just to keep the peace. And each time I would answer no, not because I didn't care about his happiness, but because this went beyond the hair. It was about standing up for myself, for everything my mother and I went through together, and for the promises we made to each other. It hurt to see my father so divided, but I knew I couldn't give in, not now. Update 2. It's amazing how much everything has changed since my last update. The situation with my father, Sarah, and the wedding has taken a completely unexpected turn, and I'm still processing everything that's happened. To begin with, the wedding has been postponed indefinitely. After my father confronted Sarah with the evidence of her manipulations, everything started to unravel quickly. At first, Sarah tried to justify herself. She claimed that everything she had done was out of love and concern. She said she was only trying to protect her daughter's self-esteem, and that Emma's insecurities were the real reason behind her request for me to get a haircut. But my father no longer believed her words. The mask he had maintained for the last 2 years was coming off, and, with it, his control over the whole situation. What shocked my father and me the most was discovering that Sarah had been systematically trying to erase any trace of my mother from our lives. My father had been so focused on the wedding and on managing his emotions that he didn't realize what was happening under his own roof. Sarah had already packed most of my mother's belongings, photos, souvenirs, all the little details that my mother had left in the house, all packed away in boxes. According to her, she was helping my father to move on. But the truth was darker. It wasn't just about getting over the grief, she wanted to completely erase my mother's presence. For Sarah, my mother represented a past she couldn't control, and she wanted to erase it completely. When my father found out about this, something broke inside him. He had tried so hard to make this new chapter of his life work, to find happiness after so much loss. But realizing that Sarah had been subtly pushing him to forget my mother, to rewrite his history, was too much. She told me she felt as if she had been blind for a long time, and now that she could finally see what was happening, she didn't know what to do. It was clear that Sarah's influence went far beyond the wedding. It was about power, control, remaking our life to fit her vision of the future. The atmosphere in the house became unbearable. Sarah stood her ground, refusing to acknowledge that she had done anything wrong. She insisted that everything she had done was for the good of the family, to help us move forward. But with the wedding on hold, the tension between her and my father worsened day by day. She couldn't handle the fact that he was no longer following her orders, and her frustration grew as more truths came to light. And then something unexpected happened. Sarah's daughter Emma contacted me privately, and, for the first time, I saw a side of her that surprised me. She apologized, not only for her involvement in the hair affair, but for how she had treated me from the beginning. She admitted that she had been under her mother's control for years, that Sarah had always been controlling and manipulative, especially when it came to appearances. Growing up with a mother like that had distorted the way Emma saw many things. She confessed to me that Sarah had convinced her that my hair, my presence, was a threat to her self-esteem. Emma told me that she had always felt insecure about her thin hair, and her mother had taken advantage of that insecurity since she was a child. Sarah had planted in her mind the idea that my long hair was a personal attack on Emma, that it made her feel less every time we were together. It sounds absurd, but when you have been conditioned to think like that for so long, I can understand how she could believe it. Emma said that at first she didn't question her mother's intentions because it was all she knew. This constant need to measure up, to be the center of attention, but after seeing how everything had gotten out of control, she began to question everything. We had a very deep conversation. Emma had lost her father when she was young, and although her relationship with her mother had always been complicated, she clung to her approval because she didn't know where else to turn. But in the last few weeks, she had begun to see Sarah's actions in a different light, especially after discovering the messages where her mother planned to put me in my place. For the first time, Emma and I were really seeing each other as people, not obstacles. She apologized for how she had treated me, and I could feel that she meant it. It was as if all the tension between us had vanished in that one conversation. We talked about how difficult it is to face loss. About the pressure we put on ourselves to meet expectations that were never really ours. Emma even admitted that she had envied my relationship with my father, something I did not expect to hear. For her, I represented that unbreakable bond with my father that she never had with her own parents, and that made her feel like an outsider. By the end of our conversation, I no longer felt the same resentment towards Emma. I realized that she too had been manipulated by Sarah, and that we were both victims of her attempts to control the situation. I wouldn't say we're friends yet, but I think we're on the right track. There's a lot to heal, but for the first time, I'm optimistic about the future of our relationship. As for my father, he's been a bit distant lately, trying to process everything. I know this has shaken him deeply, and he's struggling to decide what to do. He doesn't want to lose Sarah, but he can't ignore the damage he's caused either. I can see the conflict in his eyes every time we talk. He is torn between his desire to move on with his life and his loyalty to my mother's memory, and he doesn't seem to know how to balance the two. For now, the wedding is on hold indefinitely, and I'm not sure if it will ever happen. There is a lot of uncertainty, and I think my father is finally starting to see that this is not just about me or my hair. These are much deeper issues that have been present for a long time. All I can do is wait and see what happens next. Update 3. Hello everyone. It's hard to believe how much everything has changed in just a few weeks. Everything feels different now. The last few days have been very emotional, but in a way that feels healing. My father and I had the conversation we needed, one I didn't even know was missing until it happened. We spent hours talking openly about everything that had built up between us. My father acknowledged that he had been ignoring many warning signs with Sarah because he was afraid of being alone forever if he missed this opportunity to be happy. He told me that after losing my mother, there was a void left that he didn't know how to deal with. When Sarah came along, it felt like a lifeline. He wanted to believe that by moving on and starting a new chapter, he could somehow escape the pain that had haunted him since Mom passed away. But now he realizes he was just running away. And in doing so, he had pressured me to sacrifice important parts of myself, my hair, my memories, my connection to Mom for his chance at happiness. It was a tearful conversation for both of us. My father apologized for using my mother's memory against me and for trying to make me feel guilty so that I would make a decision that was not mine to make. He told me how proud he is of me, not only for standing up to Sarah, but for staying true to my principles even when everyone was pressuring me to give in. He acknowledged that he needs professional help to process his grief, something he hasn't been able to do fully since Mom passed away. He's already made an appointment with a therapist, which is a big step for him. For the first time in a long time, I feel like my father is ready to face his pain instead of burying it. Sarah, meanwhile, has shown her true colors in ways we can no longer ignore. After the wedding was officially called off, she's been bad-mouthing our family to anyone who will listen. She says we're all trapped in the past and obsessed with a dead woman. At first, her comments made me furious, but now I just feel sorry for her. It's clear that Sarah has deep-seated insecurities and, instead of facing them, she attacks those around her. My father has definitely ended his relationship with her. He told me that he cannot imagine a future with someone who not only disrespects me, but also tries to erase my mother's presence from our lives. Although I know he is hurting, I also sense that he feels relieved. What has surprised me the most is Emma. After our last conversation, she made an important decision. She has decided to move out. She told me that this whole situation has opened her eyes to how toxic her mother's behavior has been for years. She has seen how manipulative Sarah can be, especially when it comes to controlling other people's appearance. Emma is ready to set her own limits and, although we are not yet best friends, I can see that she is making a genuine effort to free herself from her mother's influence. I never thought I would say this, but I hope that one day we can be close, not as half-sisters, but as two people who have shared difficult experiences. As for me, this whole situation has brought to the surface emotions that I didn't know were still present. Losing my mother was the most difficult thing I've ever experienced. And although I've tried to honor her memory as best I can, this conflict with Sarah made me realize that I haven't fully processed my grief. I've also made an appointment with a therapist because, although I've been strong, I think it's time to allow myself to be vulnerable. There is no shame in asking for help, and I am ready to face those emotions that I have kept locked away for so long. Meanwhile, I have made a decision about my hair, but not in the way that Sarah or anyone else would have expected. I'm not going to cut it all off, but I found a charity that accepts small sections of hair to make wigs for children with cancer. I think it's the perfect way to honor my mother's memory while helping others who are going through the same thing I went through. My hair will still be long, but knowing that a part of it will help someone else regain their confidence feels like the right way to close this chapter. My father and I are also planning a trip to the beach, Mom's favorite place. It's something we've wanted to do for years, but we always found an excuse to postpone it. Now, after everything that happened with Sarah and all the emotions that have surfaced, we know it's time to go and honor her memory the way she deserves. However, we are not rushing. The trip will not be soon because after all the emotional chaos of the last few weeks, we both need time to breathe. The drama with Sarah has been exhausting, and it's easy to forget that healing takes time. Although we have grown closer through this experience, my father and I also need some space at the moment. Time to individually process everything that has happened and what is still to be resolved. To everyone who has followed this story and offered me advice and support, I can't thank you enough. You have helped me see that I am not alone and that standing up for my principles and my mother's memory was not selfish but necessary. It sometimes takes the support of many people to recognize and confront toxic behavior, and I am so grateful for every person who helped my father and me see the truth. As my father said recently, Mom would be proud not because I kept my hair long, but because I kept our memories alive and stood up for what was right. Thank you for helping me see that and for accompanying us in this process.